Welcome back to A Celtic State of Mind. It's a full house. It's a Tuesday afternoon. I'm Paul John Dykes, and today I'm joined by bottom right, Swindon CSC, or is it Swindon Shamrock? Brian
Swindon
Degnan.
Shamrock CSC.
The Swindon Shamrock. On the bottom left, we've got James Jota McKenzie. You're not a resident in Edinburgh, but you are studying there. And on top right, we have the one, the only, Liam Carrigan. You're going to fill us in all about the Japanese tour. But before we do any of that, tell us about that jersey. That's a cracker.
Right, well, in light of the weekend's events, I wanted to show a wee bit of solidarity with the Celtic women and the fantastic performance they put in on Sunday. And this is actually the new shirt for the Japan women's team for the upcoming World Cup in August. So it's sky blue and cherry blossom pink themed top, and I'm just lucky that they're doing them in men's sizes. So no, it's no hoops. It's like if I hide my man boobs here, you can see it kind of goes down to like a cherry tree thing. It's maybe nice. Like the sky and the cherry trees. So
very nice indeed. I'm sure we will be talking about that particular result, the aftermath of it as well, everything else that's coming up in the world of Celtic. But there's been quite a lot of chat yesterday. And by the way, we do read all the comments on the YouTube channel, good, bad and indifferent. Thank you everybody for getting involved in that. I'm talking after the live show, and there was a few comments coming in saying that we go too easy on Joe Hart. So I'm going to start off with Joe Hart today. And obviously the main tagline, get your thoughts in. Which Scottish Cup final jerseys are still up for grabs? We started talking about that yesterday in relation to the centre-half position. Are there any others? I'm going to come to yourself first, Liam. Did you used to play in goals? You said that before, didn't you?
I once had a trial with Queen's Park as a goalkeeper. So
bona fide goalkeeper expert. You're the specialist. Now, listen, before we go into a discussion about Joe Hart, first thing I would say is Joe Hart will play in the Cup final. Joe Hart has been an exceptional signing for Ange Postecoglou, and I've called him previously, pound for pound, his best signing. Hatate might push him in relation to that. However, in the last few weeks, Liam, I think he's been pretty poor. I've got to say, I thought against Rangers, he didn't command his area. I think he was at fault for at least one of the goals. When you watch back Curtis Main's opener against St Mirren, there was a mishap between Iwata and Ralston, but Joe Hart needs to do better. And not just that isolated incident. I'm talking about, actually commanding that area. Enough of the punches and the parrying into the danger zone, and just being a far bigger leader than he has been in the last couple of weeks. I don't think it's been an issue all season. Just in the last few weeks, it started to creep in and become a concern.
What I would say to that is, though, if he had the same dip in form and he was playing in any other position in the team, would we be having this conversation?
Exactly.
Probably not, because it's the end of the season, the league's already won, and ultimately none of these games actually matter. He has been an excellent goalkeeper for us when it's mattered. You could say he's been poor the last couple of games. He has. I'm one of Joe Hart's biggest fans, but I'm not going to lie. He has been poor the last couple of games. But so has pretty much the rest of the team as well. Mm-hmm. I don't think Reo Hatate has turned in a single good performance since he came back from his injury. Now, coming back off the back in injuries, maybe a bit sluggish, that's fine. And ultimately, the only game he's played in that's really mattered was the game at Tynecastle. But, I don't think, by all means, criticise Joe Hart when he has a poor performance. But if you're going to criticise, I would say be consistent. Because the entire team deserve the same rocket up them that Joe Hart seems to be getting at the moment.
Mm. And he has been getting that. We've done a show and also a follow-up blog in relation to the goalkeeper situation, James, where I am of the view that we've got far too many goalkeepers, especially when you look at the amount of appearances that they're making or not, as the case may be. All but 2 appearances this season in goals have been made by Joe Hart. The other 2, of course, was the League Cup performances by Benjamin Siegrist. So where are we with the goalies? We've just given Scott Bain a new deal. James, Joe Hart still is the number one. My view on this is you bring in another goalie, you get rid of the rest other than Toby, who you probably loan out for a season. And whoever you bring in, you want them to be at that kind of level where they're challenging Joe Hart. I've spoken about a potential complacency. He's not been challenged this season. We brought in Siegrist, and he's not actually challenged them for the gloves, has he?
Yeah, we've not really seen much of Siegrist. I think an injury could
perhaps a tribute to that. I think Siegrist has been injured quite a bit throughout this season, but the renewal of Scott Bain, I think, says a lot for Toby Oluwayemi and where he's seen at Celtic. He was once very highly rated, and we've spoke about the reason for keeping Scott Bain. Perhaps it could be to fit the homegrown quota. Toby Oluwayemi could fit that homegrown protocol. If he's rated behind Scott Bain by those in the Celtic higher-ups, then you've got to think what that really says for Toby Oluwayemi. But just, I want to touch on Joe Hart. I think the last sort of 2 games, he's been pretty poor. The first goal against St Mirren, he's got to really do better for that. But I think with errors with Joe Hart, you could really call back to the European campaign at the start of the season. There was quite a few calamitous errors that really cost Celtic in games where we looked competitive. We looked like we could go toe-to-toe with these bigger teams. And it's been a case with Celtic for years where we've not really had a goalkeeper, bar Fraser Forster, that could really stand up in these European games. And I've said countless times in the podcast, even since January, when you're looking ahead to the European campaign next season, you've got to be brutally honest with your assessment of the squad. And if you're going to be brutally honest about how you want Celtic to improve, and if Ange's going to make these strides in Europe, I think goalkeeper's got to be a position that you're looking at to improve. It's a hard market to buy for, to find a top quality goalkeeper. Joe Hart was a steal initially when Ange plucked him from that Spurs team, but you've got to really focus and think goalkeeping is perhaps a position you can improve going into next season.
Yeah, I mean that is the discussion, and that's where I think a lot of people have been disagreeing or saying that we've either been too harsh or not harsh enough. I don't want to be harsh on anybody, Brian, to be honest with you. I think, as I say, I think Joe Hart's been a great signing for us on and off the park, but it is a position that I think we're top heavy when it comes to goalies. That'll obviously be resolved over the summer months. I'm pretty sure every other goalie, barring Toby, will still be on their way out of the club. And by the way, we've got a 7th goalie, and the hero Clark, who was saving penalties for fun in the Youth Cup final as well. So the Glasgow Cup final, rather. So I think that it is a position worth talking about. Where are we in terms of yourself when it comes to Joe Hart? Do we have another season with him as number 1, or is it Casey bringing somebody in to actually challenge him?
So the past, I'll pick up on different points. So the past couple of games aside, I've been saying for a while, I think we need an upgrade. And purely because the saves Joe Hart makes, you kind of expect him to make. Where I think he needs to improve is the way how comfortable he is with the ball at his feet. That's a wee bit of concern for me, especially in Europe. So I've been thinking most of this season we'll probably need to replace him at the end. What Hart brung initially, which made him so impressive, it wasn't the fact that it wasn't his sheer goalkeeping ability. It was the fact that he was so confident. He was organising that back four. There was a real stability to that. And you could see him calling it. He was vocal. He was commanding. And there was these kind of unquantifiable things that made him such a good signing. He was also good for the dressing room as well, good leadership. And I think his different performances came lately because of a lack of confidence. I think you see his confidence rocked a little bit. I think without Carter Vickers in front of him, I think that's made the defence weaker. So I think if you get a goalkeeper whose confidence is going, a defence who's a bit weaker, I think that's a perfect storm, and I think that's why. So I don't think it's just been Joe Hart. I don't think it's just been in defence. I think it's been a mixture of the whole team, from front to back. It's interesting, James was talking about Europe and Liam was talking about criticism, because I thought Joe Hart get rightly criticised for some of the performances in Europe, but I thought Kyogo got away with the prize because Kyogo never scored in Europe and he had a lot of chances. Now I love Kyogo, so does everybody. He's player of the year for almost everyone with eyes. But if they're not playing well or they're making a mistake, you have to call it out, because you can't go, oh, we'll let that player away with it and criticise them. And that's to Liam's point. So I think some of the criticism, I don't know if it's necessarily unfair in terms of who's pointed at. I think it's unfairly distributed, because I think there's a lot of people, especially in the past few games, and I include Callum McGregor in that. I'd say that first half against St Mirren, I thought he was rotten. I thought he was misplacing passes right, left and centre. His positioning was poor. Ralston, who, we've sort of been championing for a long time, I thought Iwata was getting criticised, but I thought he was at fault for the first goal, because when Iwata goes out, he should be covering in the space behind, but instead he covers in front, and then two of them in no man's land. So I think there's a lot of criticism could be dished around. But in terms of Joe Hart, I've been saying all season, or for most of the season, we will need to improve that area. It's not really to do with recent forms. And then just finally, your point on Toby Oluwayemi. I don't think he's played for Cork. He's been at Cork last season. I think he's played twice. Mm-hmm. So if he's not good enough to play for Cork, without disrespect to League Ireland, he's not good enough to play for Celtic and be backup. That's just a hard fact. And the reality is, if these guys are on loan and they're not tearing it up, they're no first choices at these clubs, why on earth should we consider them first choice at Celtic? So I think Scott Bain's in there because he's kind of a safe pair of hands if you need him. I think he seems quite content to be sort of third place keeper. He's obviously popular in the squad. So I think he stays. Siegrist, he'll probably go. I think we'll get a new keeper in, and I think Oluwayemi will also go, at least for another loan.
Oluwayemi, I was just looking at it on James's first point in relation to the quota and the fact that he actually came to Celtic from Spurs in 2019 would indeed, James, mean that he has been there long enough in terms of the development of that player. It has to be a 3-year development, I think, the period. So, yeah, he's been there 4 years, so he would certainly fit the quota. With regards to his performances, though, he's been out injured. So he's had a bad groin injury. So after the first two games against Bohemians and Derry City, in which he conceded a soft goal that was mentioned time and time again, he has had a bad injury. So I think of the goalies, he's the one who is going to get a chance. And he did have a really bad, and I think it done the rounds on the social media channels, as these things do, make a wee mistake, like yesterday when I was saying knockout, but I missed out the N in knock, and the headline and the thumbnail said something completely different. I was asking Ange to deliver a cock out instead of a knockout, and I know we call him Big Ange, but I didn't really want to go there, and it took all of about 3 seconds for people to notice that and start ripping me to pieces, because that's what happens online. So yeah, the goalkeeper situation, but it is one I think it's been key to the success over the last 2 years. Joe Hart, I think, has been a massive part of that, the leader that we so needed at that point. You think back to the season prior to Ange coming in, a massive problem was the goalie, wasn't it? I mean, it was difficult to even say who was your number one. You had 3 goalies all playing games throughout that season, one of whom got a bit of a bumper deal for one performance in a cup, Conor Hazard, and I'm guessing he'll be out the building as well. But let's pick up on the McGregor comment that Brian made. But before we do that, we'll have a look at some of the comments coming in. Joe Hamilton, good afternoon, Paddy Boy, and all the other boys and girls here to get their daily Acsom fix. Thanks, everybody, for getting involved. You can also get your Acsom fix on the blog, which is regularly being updated at acsom.net as well. Paul McLean, no reason Inverness should worry about that Celtic backline. Forwards haven't been great lately either. I see a struggle. Right, let's talk about that then, because I've seen a lot of that as well, Liam. I mean, I know that people are saying Inverness is our bogey team. Well, they have been known in cups, 3 that I can think of, where they've come up with a result against Celtic. I don't see them being a bogey team. I just see them being a side that we've got to deal with the utmost respect, and I'm sure Ange will. We're going to have too much for them unless every circumstance goes against us, and I don't expect that to happen. But in terms of the defence, let's don't forget, we still have the best defence in Scotland over the last 2 seasons.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing you've got to keep on keeping in the back of your mind is like, yeah, recent performances have not been great, but, you know, as Ange said, it's what happens over the course of a season. And if you said to us that, you know, even if we had to play our second string defence in a game against Inverness, I would still fancy us to win it. Now, that is no disrespect to Inverness. They are in that final and they're there on merit. And I do think it will be a tense game. You know, I don't think it's going to be a 5 or 6-0 to Celtic. I think it will be more like maybe a 2 or 3, 2 or 3-1 maybe. Mm-hmm. I think we will win. We'll win fairly comfortably, but it's not going to be the cakewalk that some would maybe expect when you play a team from a lower league, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what league you're in. You're not a Diddy team if you get to a cup final.
No, you're right. And by the way, with regards to the cakewalk, I think what happens is, in a situation like that, is they will approach it very much like Stephen Robinson has approached every game this season against Celtic. And they will be looking at that as a blueprint. I think Big Yogi came out and said that earlier on today. That will be the blueprint for Inverness to follow. Yogi himself has been there and has won the cup with Inverness. With regards to the comments on McGregor then, James, I'll come to you on that. Again, he's a player that's so consistent. Celtic released his stats yesterday. The consistency is unbelievable. He's heading towards an appearance tally at Celtic if he keeps going the way he's going. We spoke about this. We looked at his average appearances over the last 8-9 seasons where he's been a regular. If he was to continue that up to the age of Scott Brown, and you hope that he would, 35, 36, he would end up being Celtic's record appearance holder. That's the trajectory that he is on. There's been comments made this week from Neil Lennon that suggest that if he continues the way he's going to end up with more honours than any other ex-Celtic player, the current record being held by Bobby Lennox, of course. And I think McGregor will be hitting 20 if he win the Scottish Cup. And then, of course, Lennon went a stage further and said he's not only captain material, he's manager material. So he's getting loads of plaudits, but he has been off it. I totally agree with Brian. That first half against St Mirren, I said at half-time to Peter, if you're taking a midfielder off on performance alone, McGregor was the worst midfielder on the park, by the way. And I don't think Atati had a great game either. But when the chips are down, he'll pull something out the bag. He'd done it at Pittodrie. He'd done it against St Mirren. He's still got that mentality. He's still got that captain's role. So is it just a case then, James, of going back to the comments that Ange made, whereby his levels are so high all the time, you can allow him a couple of games or a couple of bad passes?
Yeah, when you're so consistent as well, he's been consistently high quality for about 4 or 5 years now, maybe even more. I might be sort of underrating him there just by saying that. When you're that consistent, poorer performances stand out even more. Even when they're not a disastrous performance, a 5 out of 10 performance will still stand out like an eyesore amongst Cal McGregor's sort of Celtic record. But it's fair to say he has been poor the last 2 games. The Rangers game especially, I know that's a game we've put to the back of our minds now, but he was really poor in that game. I thought, as he mentioned, Rio Atati, he was pretty poor as well. I don't think he's been poor in every single game since he came back from his injury. I thought he was the best player in the park when we won the league at Hearts. I thought Atati was phenomenal then, but yeah, the games where McGregor plays poor, they stand out even more. But how good of a servant he's been to the club and how good of a servant he will be for the future, he will go on to be one of the most successful players, if not the most successful player in Celtic history. And I hope he can be part of a good European stride next season as well.
I was also seeing a stat, one that I would need to double and treble check, Brian, that if he wins the treble this season, he's won more trebles than anybody else in world football. Is that a stat? That would be what his 5th. Is that right?
Well, I think so. Yeah, 8's the record for the world record for trebles, isn't it?
Yeah,
he's
for the team.
5, so yeah, you've got to assume that would be the.
Wow.
Thing. Interesting. It's interesting to talk about McGregor, and I think James makes a good point there. About McGregor plays at such a high level all the time that when it drops off, it seems worse. And actually, I think that's kind of indicative of Angie's team. You think we're so consistent and play so flashy and so well at times. When it is a bit of a drop off, it seems worse. It sort of seems like it's a massive drop because standards are usually so high. And I agree. I think it was poor in the first half, but this is a key thing that I'm always ranting and raving about. It's that winning mentality, because McGregor, if he drove the team on, even though he was in a poor game, he never hid. He still kept asking for the ball. Second half, he picked up a lot better. He was more commanding. He also got the equaliser, and I thought he spoke well at the end, where he said he was annoyed at the performance. It wasn't frustration. It wasn't disappointment. He was annoyed at it because of those standards.
Yeah,
so I quite like that. I think sometimes when players with such a strong mentality, even though they're having a bad game, can still pull something out of the bag. It's just so happened to be against St Mirren and against Rangers. Most of the team was having a shocker, really. I know Starfield gets it a lot, but I thought he was really poor against St Mirren. I thought Iwata was kind of hung out to dry a bit, if I'm honest. I thought, given the fact he was put in at centre half and it wasn't his not natural position, and I don't think the rest of the team helped him much. Liam be better talking about this more than me, but I was a bit disappointed Kobayashi get dropped. I didn't feel like it merited him being dropped and Starfelt retaining his place just to put Iwata in. I thought that was a kind of confusing mistake. I just didn't really see why he did that. I don't think it's going to help his confidence at 22 for that to happen, especially when, everyone was pretty bad. But again, this isn't saying suddenly this is a bad team. I think it's just the drop-off. Because at the end of the day, it was only a draw. We didn't get beat. But I think, generally speaking, we're so used to playing that, as Don Haggerty used to say, the roaring, free-scoring, never boring style.
The Don.
The Don.
Listen,
I think that's how it seems worse.
I was looking at some quotes from another one of your friends, Brian. Not the Don Haggerty, but the Don O'Neill, Martin O'Neill. You and Martin got on like a house on fire to such a degree that we had to try and separate you because you were hogging him. And he was ruffling your hair and you were enjoying a wee glass of the red and all that. It was great to see. But if you go back, cast your mind back actually to 2003-04, where we were preparing to play Dunfermline in the Scottish Cup final. And that became, and we knew it was going to be Henrik Larsson's final game, the competitive game, as it turned out. And, there was a period of time there where we had won the league and we had the Scottish Cup coming up, and it was the same old chat about running for different records and all this kind of stuff. And there was a noticeable drop. Can you remember, Liam? There was a noticeable drop in the tempo and in the performances in Martin O'Neill's team. So you've got two managers there in O'Neill and Ange with incredible standards, really, really high levels. And it happened then. That's what happens, We've won the league. It's in the bag, and the levels dropped back then, and they've dropped this season as well. There's no denying it, And whether or not there's anything you can do about that is another matter. What was then the concern back then was that we could get back up for the cup final. Well, of course you get up for a cup final, because every time we've got to get up for a game, Liam, we do. We've won the important games, and that really is what we need to focus on.
The last 2 weeks have really reminded me of one game in particular. And apologies for the name I'm about to drop here, but I was my dad and I were invited to be Brian Dempsey's guests at a game just after Celtic won the league back in 2001. And you think we've just won the league, we're about to go to the cup final and win a treble. I might go out and get gubbed 2-0 at home by Dundee. All I'll say is thanks a lot, Brian. I'm glad the bevy was free that day because I certainly needed it. But,
I thought you were going to say something much worse than Brian Dempsey.
No. But no, it was a lovely day out, though. It really was. It was good of Brian to invite us out. But no, it was. It just showed when I watched the games of the last 2 weeks. That is exactly where my mind went. It was like, that was like that game against Dundee where we just league was in the bag. We were getting ready for a cup final, and mentally, the players obviously had half of their gaze on Hampden and not on the game where they should have been playing. So, and just to touch on Brian's point about Kobayashi, what I would say, there are a couple of things with this, which I know I'm in no place to criticise Ange. There's a reason why he's the Celtic manager and I'm some numpty in Japan, right? But he if the reasoning behind dropping Kobayashi was to give him the psychological kick up the backside of losing his place, that's not how the Japanese psyche works. That's not going to have the desired effect, because over here players get rotated in and out routinely, and they are taught that you earn your place in that team, and even after you've earned it, you don't necessarily keep it. Which is why, for example, when Maeda first signed, he was in and out of the team, but you didn't hear any complaints from him because it was the same when he was playing elsewhere. He knew that berth has to be earned, and when he first arrived at Celtic, in his eyes, he hadn't earned it yet. Kobayashi is now in the same spot. So I agree with Brian that you can't to drop Kobayashi and not drop Starfelt when I think they were both equally culpable in the game against the mob across town. I really do think that it was a bit unfair. from looking at it from an outsider's point of view. But we don't know what's happening in training. Kobayashi might be feeling a bit psychologically down after that game. He might be feeling physically tired. He might have got roughed up a bit more than we saw on TV. And Ange maybe just said to him, look, son, just take a step back and work on your training for a bit more. Then we'll put you back in the team when you're ready. I mean, I fully expect Kobayashi to play the next game because it's quite clear Iwata is not a centre half, right? And that's no fault of his own, but it's not comfortable for him, and it clearly unsettled Tony Ralston as well playing alongside him because the two of them were absolutely shocking at the weekend. But I know that Iwata's a class act. I've seen enough of him to know that he could in time become as valuable, and I'm going to say this, he could become as valuable to the team as Callum McGregor is now in the fullness of time. Especially if he ends up playing alongside McGregor in the midfield holding role in Europe next season. Yeah. So really, the Kobayashi one's a bit of a mystery to me, but I'm sure there is a perfectly reasonable behind-the-scenes explanation to it. And to be quite honest, I'm glad that we don't know because it's nobody's business but the managers and Yuki Kobayashi's.
I was going to ask before going on to James on that point, Liam, right? Because of your knowledge of Japanese football, it's been mentioned by Ange that Iwata has played there previously in Japan. Was he deemed a decent enough centre-half when he played over in Japan? Or, I mean, I rate him. For what I've seen, I really regard him highly as a midfielder. But was it just an off day, or have you seen enough to suggest, listen, don't play him there?
It's definitely not his strongest position, right? It's definitely not his strongest position. But bear in mind that in Japan, all players are trained to play multiple positions, right? You know, Hatate played about 4 months at left back before we signed him as a creative midfielder, right? Maeda was a target man when he played for Matsumoto Yamaga, right? Kyogo played as a winger quite often when he was playing for Vissel Kobe. So just because a player has played a couple of games in another position doesn't mean he's going to step into the Celtic team and be able to do it effectively. The other thing is the physical aspect. In Japan, you know, I don't mean to generalise, but most strikers are Kyogo's size, they're not Curtis Main's size, you know. So it's a wee bit of a different ball game, so to speak. Yeah. But I really do. I don't think that he is the answer at centre back. You know, it reminded me a lot of Nir Biton. Can't fault his effort, can't fault his commitment to the cause, but it's clearly not where he should be playing.
I know, and sometimes when you're beat on, he would lead you into a false sense of thinking, actually, he's not a bad centre half, and then invariably he would lose a header on a corner and would be a goal down. James, I'm going to ask you the question because we'll go through the positions in relation to the jerseys that are up for grabs, and then once we've spoken about the centre halves here, we'll have a wee chat about where we see the positions that might still be up for grabs in the defensive areas. My kind of take on it at the weekend was this. I think Kobayashi hasn't been great against Hearts or Rangers. I think that he was kind of out-muscled in both games. And I'm not pointing my finger just at him because there was a lot of bad performances at Ibrox. And I think that what Ange was doing at the weekend, and as Liam says, we don't know what's going on behind the scenes, he was having a look at his only other centre-half option, just in case in the next couple of games before the cup final, something happens with Kobayashi. So he wanted to have a look at Iwata at centre-half. And I know that he would have seen him playing there and over in Japan. But I just think, for me, that was his thinking behind it. We don't have Stephen Welsh. He's not on the bench. He's out injured, by all accounts. You're not going to bring in Lawal. I said this yesterday. I know that he's been highly rated, etc. But from what I've seen, I don't think that he's ready for that step up, especially not in a Scottish Cup final. So what he's done there is he's played Iwata, even though it's his kind of secondary position, James. He's played him there just to say, you know, if I need to do it in a cup final, at least it's not the first time you've played there for Celtic. What's your take on it, and do you still think there is a centre-half jersey up for grabs, or do you think it's Starfelt and Kobayashi all day long?
I think it will probably be Starfelt and Kobayashi. As much as I thought Kobayashi looked really shaky in 2 consecutive games, Hearts and Rangers, he was absolutely bullied by John Souttar at the set piece. I thought Iwata had a really poor game. I had a wee gander at Transfermarkt, that wonderful website, before when the team lineup was announced for the St Mirren game, when I saw Iwata at centre back. apparently about 3/4 of his minutes as a professional footballer has been as a centre-back. So I was surprised to see when I watched the game, he looked exactly like a defensive midfielder playing at centre-back. He was caught out of position time and time again, as well as being bullied by Curtis Main the entire game. Curtis Main was targeting him for a reason. There's a reason Curtis Main could have had about 3 or 4 goals in that game, because Timothy Iwata had such a poor performance. But Starfelt has been poor as well. Since we won the league, Starfelt has been pretty poor, but you can't drop Starfelt. You can't for this final coming up. But just on the final, I think Celtic have proved time and time again in the big games, the games that matter, the games where everything's on the line, we step up. We step up to a new level. And we've dropped off at the moment for these last 2 games, but I have no doubts that the standards are going to raise, and we'll see the Celtic that we've come to know and love under Ange in that game against Inverness. So I've got no sort of worries about it at all. Hopefully we can put on a show this upcoming weekend. We always do when we win the title. It's always a real sort of show, a real hammer. Apart from that one that lost to Aberdeen under Rodgers, that's one that sort of sticks out. But if we can put on a show for the fans, lift the title, all the morale's boosted, and then we go into the final with our heads high.
Was that the day when Shea Logan was acting like he'd won the World Cup?
Yeah,
I remember that. Talking of World Cups, the reason I was looking at the comments by O'Neill at that time was that he was in talks at that stage to try and sign Rivaldo, talking to another World Cup winner, Rivaldo for Celtic as a replacement for Larsson. That all sounds a bit bizarre, but it did indeed happen. So let's talk then about that defence. Brian, I'll come to you next. The boys are saying Kobayashi and Starfelt. I agree with that. Joe Hart, you don't drop him for a cup final. What about the 2 fullbacks then? Because there's still a suggestion that Johnson might be back. But my point yesterday was, even though I think Johnson's a far better option at right back, Brian, I don't like throwing somebody in that's been out injured. And I think we've been stung a few times this season by trying to rush players back into the side. So even if Johnson's fit for the final, I'm not sure I would start him. Give me a wee chat about the way that you would set up your back 5, because I think we're all in agreement the core of that, the central area that stays as it is. There's a question mark about the fitness of Taylor. He's been managed at the moment. But when it comes to Ralston, and I agree with you, I don't think he's been at his best, I would still be really reluctant to throw somebody back in if they're fit for the final.
Yeah, I kind of agree, I think. So just as broadly speaking, although we've been kind of critical of the team's performance the past couple of games, I think when there is a game to win, when there is pressure on, the team's stronger. So I've no doubts in the final we'll be better than we've been because there's something there.
Yeah,
I think the team's got that mentality, and I think the fact we won the league, I think it's almost that sort of sigh, that relief, and that's caused a bit of the performance. And I think when you talk about mentality, I think Ralston's really got that, and I think it'd be harsh to drop him. I know he didn't have the greatest game, but he's been out for a long time as well. And again, he was next to a kind of makeshift back 4. So I would have Ralston. Yeah, you need to start out Kobayashi for balance. Taylor, if he needs a wee rest, I would drop him for the next 2 games and then bring him back in, because I think he's really key. I still like Bernabei. I think he's got a huge ceiling, but he's quite raw and he's a wee bit rash, and you don't need that in a cup final. But what I would do, I don't think this will happen, but what I would do is I'd play Iwata again in front of them with McGregor and O'Reilly, or McGregor and Hatate, whoever's performing well in training, because I just think the defence is a wee bit vulnerable just now, as we've said. Confidence is going to be low. Inverness will try and just throw balls up. So if you get Iwata dropping back a little bit when the fullbacks are bombing up, you turn it into a solid back 3 if you need to, just to get him to help, sort of sweep up, because I think Iwata's better defensively than McGregor will be. Now, normally I would say against Inverness, without any disrespect to Inverness, you would need that extra holding player in there. Mm-hmm. But I just think with the defence being a wee bit vulnerable and a wee bit sort of maybe confidence isn't great, I would have Iwata there, just a bit of protection. The only downside for that is you need to drop either Hatate or O'Reilly, because I don't think I'd drop McGregor. And then the front 3 picks itself, I think, Jota, Maeda and Diogo. While I'm very critical of Maeda, and I think he's great off the ball, I don't think he's brilliant on the ball. I still think what he gives the team, especially in that environment, is hard to drop him. and he really defends so well for the front. So you would have to play him.
Brian's given us his starting 11, Liam. He's starting 11. And by the way, going back to what you said earlier, I think Awata is an exceptional player. I just think he looked like a guy who was playing out of position at the weekend. I thought that when he came on, and I've said this numerous times against Rangers when we won 3-2, he was pivotal. He was massive in us regaining control of that game. When we're looking towards the cup final, and I know we've got Hibs tomorrow night, which we'll be talking about as well, what do we do for that in terms of the Ralston situation? Because yesterday I mentioned about, Ralston was flying and then he got this injury and he's not right back up to that level that he was at before. I think we've seen a bit of the Ralston of old against St Mirren at the weekend there, where he was ponderous, the passing wasn't on point, he wasn't winning as many duels. He's one of the guys that you would expect to be winning most of the duels, especially when the chips are down, and it didn't seem to happen for him. There's talk that Moy and Johnston are going to win their fitness battle for the cup final. That concerns me a wee bit though, Liam. I think if that happens, you bench them. You don't throw them right into the starting 11.
Aye, if it's a choice between 60 to 75% fit Johnson and 100% fit Ralston, you go with Ralston. Because at the end of the day, you shouldn't be in the Celtic squad if you're not good enough to be deployed in a game against Inverness, with the greatest of respect to them. We should not have any qualms with putting any first team squad member into that game if need be. They all have at least that base level quality. Yeah. From Scott Bain onwards, Scott Bain is the sort of player who, is he going to be a European level goalkeeper? No, he isn't. And he's old enough now that he never will be, with the greatest of respect to him. But he's good enough for pretty much any game in Scotland. So, again, that's a guy you shouldn't be afraid of if you had to. No, that's, obviously Joe Hart's going to play, but I'm just using him as an example. I'm going to throw a wild one out here. Could there be the option of going to a back three? Because we know Kobayashi is more naturally left-sided. Starfelt works best when he's at the right of centre or centre. And Ralston's got the physical presence that you could pull him in and have him as a right-sided centre-back. So how about if we had, say, Taylor wide, sort of wing-back on the left, and then you had Kobayashi inside left centre-back, Starfelt as a centre-back, Ralston as the right-sided centre-back, and then you can deploy, possibly, if you want to be more attacking, possibly deploy Abada wide right. And then you still keep that midfield three of McGregor, Hatate, and potentially O'Reilly. But you've also got the option of putting Iwata in there if you want a bit more steel, or you can put Moy in there if he's fit, because at the moment, if Moy is fully fit, for me, he starts ahead of O'Reilly or Iwata.
Interesting shape there. I mean, the big thing about the cup final, if I seen any big changes, Liam, I would be pretty worried. That's what starts to get me worried. When I see changes in the team, like against Rangers, I'm looking at that thinking, oh, no, man, I was pretty confident coming into this game, but now with the changes, I'm not so sure. That's the only thing that would concern me, that he's not really done that before.
If he was going to do it, and I don't think he will now, but if he was going to do it, he would probably try something like that in the next couple of league games. Mm-hmm. Because, like you say, you don't go into a cup final and decide to experiment, right? If he's going to do it, if he's going to play a back three, he would try it out in one of the remaining league games. But so if it doesn't happen tomorrow, if it doesn't happen against Aberdeen, it's not going to happen.
Yeah. Well, before we go any further about the fixture tomorrow night and also some of the other jerseys that might be up for grabs, Liam, I want to talk to you specifically about our visit to Japan. I've had plenty of people saying that they want to get in touch with you so that you can tell them where all the hostelries, etc., are going to be and all that kind of stuff. With your local knowledge, obviously, you're the man on the deck. You know what's going on. You've got the finger on the pulse. But obviously, more and more information is coming out in relation to the pricing and the ticketing. Give us a wee update on your thoughts, because I understand you're not very happy with the pricing.
No, to be quite honest, the pricing is, for want of a better word, ridiculous. Now, to put this into perspective, I'll use the context of 2 other games that I've been to fairly recently, right? Last time I was at a big sort of international football match in Japan was 2019, just before COVID hit. August 2019, when Ange was still manager of Yokohama, I saw them play Man City. Now, my ticket for that game, which was admittedly the cheapest ticket, was 5,000 yen, which is, I think, about 20 quid, roughly speaking, 20, 25 quid. So, pretty much par for the course. Now, if you're going to a J League game, the cheapest ticket is 2,500 yen, going up to 10,000 yen for the dearest ticket. Now, 10,000 yen is about 80 quid, 80, 90 quid. Whereas with the Celtic game, now I'm going with my lovely wife, and if Kayo and I want to sit together, we had to get the sort of the category 3 tickets, because the category 4 is like open seating, basically sit wherever you want. Now that's fine. When I was going to the Man City game, I didn't mind sitting myself. When I'm with my wife, obviously I want to be sitting together, so we had to pay extra for that. So they were 9,500 yen for the cheapest. So basically, the cheapest option for this game was almost double the price of the cheapest option for the Man City game. Mm-hmm. But it gets worse, because you then go up to the next grade up was, I think, 14,000, then 18,000, and up to 30,000 yen just for the match ticket. That's not any hospitality, because it actually says on the site hospitality details will be released at a later date. So you're talking about, I think, 200 quid just for a match ticket.
Wow. For
a single match ticket. No executive stuff, no corporate, not even a free pint before the game. Now, I know exactly where Celtic have got that pricing structure from, because a couple of years ago, Barcelona played Chelsea in a pre-season friendly, and the pricing structure was identical.
Right.
And I was going to go to that game because I thought, when am I ever going to get to see Messi in the flesh, right? But one, I didn't want to give those scumbags Chelsea any money, and two, the ticket pricing was just ridiculous, and I thought, I don't want to encourage that. I don't want to think clubs to think it's acceptable to come over here and charge 200 quid a ticket because they think Japanese fans don't know any better. Mm-hmm. Your dearest ticket in the J League is about 75 quid, and that is your premium level seating, right? That's like your sort of the equivalent of like sitting in the padded seats in the North Stand at Celtic Park. It's that kind of thing, right? Mm-hmm. But for Celtic to use the same pricing structure as a team that included Lionel Messi is just right. We have fans in Japan because we have a few Japanese players, right? But you don't charge Moe Shandong prices for Buckfast. You know what I mean? Right.
Well, I think the key would be fill the stadium out. It's all about getting the word out there, so that they come and see Celtic and they're introduced to Celtic. We spoke about it the other week, Liam. The introduction to this football club. The link being the fact that, yes, we do have some Japanese players. We've got Ange, who's managed in Japan. Come along and see it and make it as affordable as possible so that the stadium's as full as it can be.
Well, that's the thing. Man City did that. And it was a sellout. Mm-hmm. Right.
What do you foresee in terms of the attendance then, Liam? What do you reckon it will be?
Well, put it this way. We had no trouble getting our tickets, and I was quite late to get in the queue for the tickets because I couldn't put down the deposit until I get paid. I didn't get paid till a week after the initial thing went out. But I got the confirmation email today that we had got our first preference for seating area. So we're in the Celtic end and we're in the reserved seating. But so that tells me that this game has nowhere near sold out, and it's unlikely to do so at these prices because, one of the things which, and I keep going back to it, one of the things that really annoyed me about that Chelsea-Barcelona game was I teach young kids, right, in my job, and a lot of them because we don't really have uniforms here the same way we do at school in Scotland, Waynes will come to school wearing their football tops, right? I go to school wearing my football tops as well, right? It's a thing we do. And the amount of Waynes that had like Barcelona and Chelsea shirts, and when that game first got announced, they were so excited. You know, Saitama, where that game was played, it's a day trip away from here, right? It's a good, hour and a half on the train. So you're looking at about £100 a head to get there and back. And then on top of that, you've then got the ticket prices. And the amount of Waynes that I saw initially being so excited about going to see Messi, and a couple of days later they just went silent. And I thought, those poor Waynes, obviously their dads have told them, look son, I can't afford that.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And it's just heartbreaking to think there could be a whole generation of potential new Celtic fans who are going to be alienated by the pricing for this game. I'm lucky. I work full time. I can afford to pay, basically £100 for plus a hotel for me and my wife to go to a game. Right? I can afford that. But a lot of people in Japan can't. And a lot of people in Japan are not expecting to pay that for a football match. No. They expect to pay that to go and see Queen or Pavarotti or something. They don't expect to pay that to watch Celtic.
That's a shame. It's a shame because, as I say, we were quite excited as well about getting the club over there and to tap into a new fan base. And unfortunately, it looks as though the greed has won the day. James, we're talking the upcoming cup final, of course, but we're not going to jump the gun. There's a couple of games before that. Hopefully you'll get to the game tomorrow night. What does Ange do tomorrow then in relation to the team? Does he try anything else out? Because he's spoken about, rotating certain players, getting players game time. Does he keep doing that for the next couple of games?
I think Hibs have still got a lot to fight for. They have that third place spot. They took a big hit and they're pushed for third place when they lost to Rangers at the weekend. So it's going to be a team that have really got something to play for, which St Mirren didn't really have last week. St Mirren were the lowest team in the championship group. So you can't really take it for granted. If you want to get the win, I feel like you want to go the closest team possible to what Ange is thinking of for the Scottish Cup final. I feel like that's sort of got to be the thinking behind it. You've got to go full strength and then whichever of these rotation players, because we've been talking about these games, they don't really mean much. To these fringe players who haven't really had an opportunity and now they're getting their opportunity, these games should mean everything. And they're coming into these games and they're not performing. And chances are when these players leave Celtic, they'll be spouting the whole, I didn't get an opportunity, I didn't get a chance, you didn't get a chance, and you were poor. I hope it's not going to be the case for them, but they really need to step up, a lot of these players. And you were talking about Ralston earlier, between Ralston and Johnson. I'm going to be lighting every candle I have in this flat and saying all the prayers I can that Alistair Johnson will be fit for that Scottish Cup final. I would take a 70% Alistair Johnson over 100% Anthony Ralston at this moment, because Ralston has been shocking. I thought he was the worst fullback on the pitch at Ibrox, and we all know how bad Bernabe was on that day. And I think since Johnson came in, he's been one of our best players, if not the best player, since January in this Celtic team. You can't take for granted what Alistair Johnson's done, how well he has embedded himself as well. And I think he would deal with being chucked into a game like a Scottish Cup final against Inverness at 70% just fine, because we saw how he done not fully fit on his debut at Ibrox. He took to the cauldron of fire very easily, and he was phenomenal on that day. We all saw how good it was, and he laid down the foundations for what he was going to do in his future at Celtic. So I would have Alistair Johnston in the team, and I'll be saying all the prayers I can that he will be there for the Scottish Cup final.
When it comes down to it as well, he's spoken about it, Brian. Ange Postecoglou has spoken about the fact, and he's name-checked Alistair Johnson being thrown in to a situation. Will that be on his mind, do you think, when he's making these plans for the Cup final? The fact that Johnston seems to be up for that type of challenge?
Possibly, yeah. I mean, I think he likes players with that sort of strength of character, doesn't he? It's something that, it seems to be one of his sort of his biggest reasons for picking players and signing them in the first place, is that sort of, as I keep saying it, the winning mentality. But I think in terms of tomorrow against Hibs, I think if there's any rotation, tomorrow will be the last time. And I think against Aberdeen, you probably see the team that's likely to play in the final. So I'd imagine if there is any rotation, if there is players like Haksabanovic or Bernabe or any of these guys come in tomorrow, it's the last chance to prove and give the manager a something to think about. on Haksabanovic, Liam was talking about crazy ideas earlier with his madcap formation, but I think Haksabanovic playing in midfield might be a shout if he does go with a double pivot with Iwata and McGregor, and you could have Haksabanovic behind Kyogo if that was, if he wanted to change it up. But I suspect, as I said, the team there, I suspect that is the team that plays in the final. So I think you probably see them against Aberdeen, but tomorrow I would imagine there'll be changes because that'll be sort of last chance saloon for people to say, right, for a couple of bad games, last chance to stake a claim. If you can't, the team who plays Aberdeen, that's who's playing. I would imagine that's what he would do.
Yeah, I mean, we'll talk a wee bit more about Easter Road, but the thing that I would like to see is Kobayashi coming back in for obvious reasons, and then Iwata getting a start in the midfield, because I do think that, as Liam says, since Hatate's come back from his injury, he's been nowhere near the level that we're expecting of Hatate due to his brilliant performances previously. O'Reilly, I think, has been all right. I think O'Reilly at this moment in time is a starter, and McGregor is a starter every day of the week. But I do think there's a question mark over Hatate simply because of his sharpness. We know what he can do. But again, if you bring in Iwata for the cup final, I would only be playing with one defensive midfielder, so it would give McGregor a wee bit of freedom as well. Keen to get your thoughts on all of that and more on the YouTube Celtic Follower afternoon all. We'd like to see Iwata starting every remaining game in midfield. Listen, you're reading my thoughts here to help cover defence. Hatate hasn't looked fully fit. And by the way, I'm not stealing your point, but I just made this point, so we are in agreement. Somebody out there does agree with me. I'd also give Owen Kyogo 45 minutes each game to keep them sharp. We were talking again on the blog in relation to Kyogo going for a personal accolade. He's already won some this season, but only 4 players in the last 20 years, Liam, have scored 32 or more goals for Celtic. The bold Kyogo's sitting on 31. He's got 3 games to go. How far can he take it? Can he go as high as 35? Is he going to reach the 32 that Dembele did and Chris Commons did? Obviously, the 40 plus that Griffiths and Larsson reached is too far removed, I would suggest. But it looks as though he's going to enter the realms of that elite, doesn't it?
I'll predict that he's going to finish up on 36. I think he'll get 2 or 3 goals over the next couple of league games, and I could see him doing the same in the cup final.
Nice. I like that level of confidence and positivity. We know that he likes a double in a cup final, though. So who would bet against it? Who would bet against that indeed? And Kevin Malley, strange one why Siegrist hasn't featured much. There's a few people talking about it. He's been fit since March and he's not been in the squad. And I think that also is one of the reasons that Bain has been given a contract. You can just imagine Ange being impressed with his attitude. Talking of attitude, I thought there was a bullish kind of attitude with Ange after the game, coming out talking about heavyweight champions of the world. But I thought that was important, Liam, because the narrative, I mean, it's probably the most... Narrative and caveat are the 2 most used words on Acsom, right? But the press narrative, I was reading this morning about a Beale revolution. A Beale revolution, incredible stuff, right? And we've obviously they've already been awarded with the Kenny Miller Cup this week as well. And the other thing that I'm looking at is the way that all of a sudden it's broken Celtic crest because we've drawn 2 league games and lost it, a meaningless game at Ibrox. So I felt that it was important that Ange came out swinging, and swinging he certainly did. And I thought he absolutely knocked out the park with his comments.
When is the can? Well, I played 1.5 good games for Rangers DVD coming out. That's what I want to know.
Yeah.
But no, the Ange takes no prisoners, and I hope that long may that continue. I just love the big man's style. He just takes no nonsense from these clowns, and he puts them right in their place every time, and it's an absolute joy to watch. I really I think that Ange was exactly right with what he said. There's a reason why we are on the cusp of winning all 3 trophies this season. And remember, until 7 years ago, that had only happened 3 times in Celtic's history.
Incredible.
So it's an amazing. It's even with our current level of dominance, both financial and footballing, it's still incredibly hard to win a treble. mean, you look at the funny money Man City have got, and I don't think they've ever done it. You look at the financial gulf, and I mean, Rosenborg in Norway, I think at one point they won the league 11 years in a row. And I don't know if they might have won three trebles in that time. Bayern Munich in Germany, they've been similarly dominant. I don't think they've won that many trebles. It's an incredibly hard thing to do.
Yeah.
And Ange was was spot on to hammer that point home and say, wait a minute here, right? A defeat and a draw out of a near flawless season up to this point is just you're like you say, you're peering so hard to try and find a narrative in that, and it's just it really is pathetic. And well, we don't have journalists in Scotland; we have stenographers. They are Ibrox bought and paid stenographers. They're no journalists. Let's be honest.
Well, it was a small example, but one of the examples of that I've seen recently, Liam, was the story they ran on young Philip Scobb, who, as we know, signed for Celtic last week. And they ran a story about how close he was to signing for Rangers, how close Rangers were to winning the race. And obviously all the names of all the other clubs followed that story. And the way that it was written was, he was being spoken of in the same breath as the first team players. The young guy's 15 years of age. Now, I can guarantee you that he was nowhere near signing for Rangers. He was absolutely nowhere near signing for Rangers. It was almost as if the email that was sent over to the Record sports desk was copied, pasted, and changed a wee bit. But that story was a non-story.
Thinking about that, right? In Scottish journalistic terms, Rangers are the equivalent of, and I'm sure we've all experienced this, that drunk half-wit in the bar who sits there for 3 hours telling you how he could have been a contender before the barman throws him out for being stupid. That is what Rangers are now. It's we could have been contenders. That's all they are. And the media are playing it up because at the end of the day, they still have to sell newspapers, and quite frankly, Rangers fans are the only people in this country still thick enough to read the Daily Record. So there you go.
Well, the revolution continues. The revolution will be televised as well, as a great man once said. What did you make of the comments, James? Obviously, the boxing references really pushed the buttons, didn't it? But he was right, because I think it was a reminder not only to the press who were talking to him. It was a reminder to us as fans that what Liam said is true. It's so difficult to do that and win a treble. We've seen at Ibrox, you can have an off day, right? We've also seen other situations where refereeing decisions go against you. You have a bad injury to a player in a key moment of the game. All these things can go against you. And that can stop you from winning a treble if that happens in a cup. I mean, you can recover from that in the league generally. And he was just pinpointing the fact that, wait a minute, what we've done has been a sensational effort. And the levels these guys have maintained over that period has been kind of off the scale. But it was also to say to them, I'll control the narrative here. So it was a double whammy. But at the same time, he's talking to his players, isn't he, James? He's talking to his players when he puts that out there. And he's telling his players, listen, this is what we've achieved. Don't let a couple of results take your focus away from that.
Yeah, I feel like it was really a message to the fans, because we're the ones who have the connection with the club more than anyone. We are emotional, we are reactionary, however we are, because we care about the club. And whenever Celtic lose or drop points or whatever happens, the fans there's always going to be an overreaction. So I think Andrew's speaking directly to the fans there, just calm down a bit here. These games, they don't really mean anything. We've come so far and we've got a chance to win a treble ahead of us. There's going to be a few games where there'll be an off day, and thankfully they've come after the league title has been wrapped up. So I think it was good for Madge to get that out there in this post-match interview.
Yeah, I'm going to recite the team. I think, Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, that you said earlier, and then I'll ask yourself, Liam and James, if you disagree with that. So Joe Hart in goals. We're talking strongest starting 11, the 11 you expect to see in the cup final with right back Tony Ralston, left back Greg Taylor, two centre halves would be Starfelt and Kobayashi. Your midfield was made up, I think, of McGregor and Hatate and O'Reilly. Is that right?
Iwata, O'Reilly and McGregor.
And then up top, you've got Maeda, Kyogo and Jota. I'll come to you first, Liam. Do you agree with Brian's starting lineup? Is there anybody else you would replace in there?
No, 100% agree with that. I'm quite happy with that. The only possible one is I could maybe see Abada getting some game time. Whether that means coming on as a sub in the second half or actually starting the game, I don't know. But I think you're going to want to have him sharp for the cup final. So Abada's going to have to get some game time over the next couple of weeks. And it might well be that he starts tomorrow, maybe at the expense of Jota. But, you know, if he starts the game, Jota comes on in the second half or vice versa. I think they're both going to get some game time tomorrow.
I get the feeling, James, I'll come to you finally. I do get the feeling that Brian's team, if you remove Iwata and bring in Hatate, I get the sense that Ange is allowing Hatate to play through this to get him right back up to the kind of peak fitness so that he probably peaks in the cup final. So that's the only change I would make. Iwata, as much as I love him, for Hatate. What about yourself?
Yeah, I think Hatate has to play one of the games coming up before the end of the season, whether it's this game or the last day. I would like to see Iwata get another bit of game time in the defensive midfield role. So I'd probably agree with Brian's team there.
Nice. Right, we'll be back tomorrow to talk pre-match the Hibs game, and obviously we'll be covering the Hibs game as well. I've got to thank everybody, as always, for getting involved. Over 600 strong on a Tuesday bulletin. If you want to come along and see us live, we are in Gracie's in Glasgow on Friday night. It's the beginning of trophy weekend, and we'll be joined by Jackie McNamara. Let's not forget what he achieved for the club as well. Jackie's always great crack, and quite a few of the Acsom team will be there. I'll be interviewing Jackie on stage, and it would be brilliant to see some of you there. 25 tickets left at the last count. So if you want to buy one, the link is underneath this video. All that's left for me to say, Liam Carrigan, James McKenzie and Brian Degnan, thank you once again for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.
Cheers.